Hey there, welcome to the Sendcloud meetup. Hope you guys can hear us perfectly. So we have a riveting conversation today. We're going to be talking about the changing role in QA in Agile and DevOps teams. So hold on to your seats. So before I get started, I would like to explain slightly a little bit about Sendcloud and what we do and why we host these meetups. So Sendcloud is a shipping automation company. Basically, we bring web shops and logistics partners together and automate all of that stuff in between. So throughout the years, we kind of figured out that we have quite smart people here, and with all these smart people that we have, we realized that these guys actually have some good ideas. So we thought, why keep it to ourselves? Let's share it with you guys. Spread the knowledge, share it with the rest of the world. So that's why we started up this meetup. We had one briefly in May. I guess we took a break for summer holidays and we're starting it up again. So hopefully there's more to come. So let's dive into it. So today we have two interesting talks. The first one will be done by our QA architect here, Wilco, who will be talking about the past, present, and future of specialist testing in development teams. So without further ado, Wilco.
All right, I'll take it away. Today I'm going to argue that the role of a test specialist has moved from being a detective to being an automator, but that it should have moved and should still move to being more of a coach-like role. And I'm going to go into as much detail on the what and why as I can in the next 20 or 30 minutes. Software testing used to be the most fun you could have in software engineering, and overall. I remember in 2012 there was an article saying that the #1 happiest job was quality assurance engineer. And that rang true at the time. The most rewarding aspect to me was the detective work. You needed imagination, you needed reasoning skills, you needed a broad set of forensic tools that you often had to write yourself, and test techniques. And with them you solved puzzles. Here's a web app, and here's the claim that it's ready for production. Go ahead and disprove that claim. And usually you get some immediate dopamine hits from finding obvious issues, and then the added satisfaction of finding bigger problems only upon deeper investigation. Not all companies work like this. In many, testing was considered to be writing test scripts and then going through them step by step and then repeating that every time a change was made. But even for companies where the testing was smart, as much as it was fun, and it was a lot of fun, it was still the wrong thing to do. Mostly because it's too late. We could have the test scenarios that we're generating at the end of the process, we could have already predicted much earlier on and then developed and tested against those, even before we start interacting with the system on the test. Plus, we should already be interacting with the system on the test at an early stage. If you look at an early local build, you can already pick up a lot of these obvious issues I mentioned, those quick dopamine hits. And so the detective had to go. So now we're in 2022, and over the last 15 years or so, we've learned a lot of new ways to become more effective and more efficient through Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery practices. And the meaning of testing has had to change along with it. How in an environment like this that's optimized for high velocity can we optimize for a high level of quality at the same time? Doesn't one preclude the other? Here's how some others have seen it, how they've seen how those principles from Agile and DevOps translate to testing and quality based on the experience that they've had or collected from hundreds of teams in the industry and on what little formal research that has been done in that area. And they agree especially on three things. One, that testing should happen at every stage of the development life cycle, not just relegated to the end. That quality is everyone's concern, that it shouldn't just be on the plate of a test engineer to cover all the testing. And to automate the repetitive stuff. create automation for all the boring stuff so that humans can focus on the interesting problems. Unfortunately, what I've seen is that many companies have taken the test automation part to heart, but only just that part, and that part in a narrow way focused on browser-driven acceptance test. And often that was replacing those scripted verification test cases that I showed earlier. And in that context, that's the right start, that's the right move to make. But that still leaves testing isolated to the end and just to the test engineer. And in the job market today, that's often what you see. If you look at jobs on LinkedIn, the requirements for a test engineer are writing these browser-driven acceptance tests, doing functional verification of acceptance criteria and user stories, and at least some involvement in challenging requirements. And that allowed the basic flow for development to remain the same, that comforting, I call it a conveyor belt of in progress, in review, ready for testing, done, and then you immediately move on and start over. And not only did testing in that way remain limited to the top of the test pyramid, it also remained largely limited to the end of the development cycle with these problems as a result. So how can that be if companies really believe in these Agile principles, DevOps principles, and apparently they do because they've adopted all the terminology, then why don't we apply the principles related to testing? This year I've had a chance to review about 40 CVs, I've done 40 interviews and reviewed 100 CVs or so. And from all that wealth of experience, I can count on one hand the number of times I've encountered experience with pair testing, with helping developers write better unit tests, with shifting right of risk mitigation, and other techniques relevant to modern testing. And I think that's a tragedy. I think that we should be using all that experience and expertise in testing and quality to help teams and truly work as teams. So how can we break out of that ready for testing column, and how can we break out of just the top of the test pyramid? I'm with Dave Farley, who said, be a guide. That's the role you could take. Lend your expertise to the team to uplift the team in how they approach testing, in how they address quality appropriately. We know that quality is more than verifying functional correctness, but we should be spreading that knowledge and that passion and how to do it. And this is a quote from all the way back to 2013, when Alistair Scott described the role of a quality advocate, which is another possibly better name than quality coach, which I've been using. Some call it quality assistant as well, and name doesn't matter. Whatever you call it, this coach-like role uplifts the whole team in building quality in from the start, instead of attempting to inspect it in at the end. And that can be done by improving the requirements, by helping developers write more meaningful unit and integration tests, by driving continuous improvement in a team, and much more. That coaching role, I think, is what we need, what we still need. Instead of merely acting as a safety net to improve the team's ability to deliver high quality at pace. And I think we do want to move at pace, at least in our context, for two reasons: to get value to customers quickly, and also to learn early on whether we're doing something of value. And while the customer is the ultimate arbiter of what brings them value, they know best, we can already prevent a lot of issues early on regarding to functionality, usability, performance, and so on. The things where we have high confidence that if we just put in a little effort now, before it gets to them, we save them a lot of grief and ourselves a lot of effort later on. So if we are in a business context where we need to achieve both speed and quality, then I think this quality coaching role makes that possible. And how specifically? Well, let's look at the flow of a discrete piece of work. So a product owner might bring a request to the team, and you, the quality coach, help the team look at the justification. Who is the customer? How are we helping them? What is the problem? It might be that you receive a ticket from the product owner or directly from the customer that already includes the solution. And as a quality coach, we can dig down and say, okay, this is what they see as a solution, but what is the real problem underneath? Could there be a better way of solving it? And then as a whole team, you can think of positive and negative scenarios to represent the business requirements. You ask about any special test data or test environment that we need. So you can already set that up in preparation instead of finding out at the end that you needed it. And you ask about any relevant quality attributes like performance, accessibility, security, and you help the whole team think of what's the best way to get this released early? Do we need a canary release? Do we need a feature toggle? And how are we going to measure that we succeeded? Then implementation starts, and that's where things really change from what I think we're used to, because it's a lot more collaborative. So you, the quality coach, you can offer to pair with developers on testing, also on comparing different implementation options even, sanity checking those. You can help with the pair programming, encouraging it in the developers, but also helping with the doing it better. And through the pair testing sessions, you bring up questions, you bring up possible scenarios, and in doing so, you give the developer ideas on testing and test techniques, thereby spreading the testing knowledge, making developers better testers, which brings you closer to that whole team responsibility for quality. And aside from all that collaboration, you can still write API end-to-end tests or UI end-to-end tests. That doesn't have to disappear necessarily. Then a release is done. Often we just immediately move on to the next thing. But instead of doing that, and instead of just being focused on our front-end part or back-end part or testing part, hopefully with this more collaborative way of working, we are more engaged than that and are interested in what we're working on and what the result of it is. So we'll want to review analytics, monitoring, and see what the impact has been of our release, not just what it did to our error rates, what it did to our page load times, but also what is the customer feedback. And on the basis of that, we can then suggest new experiments for how to bring even more value to the customer based on the feature we just released, or how we can do better as a team. Maybe there's a better way to deliver, and we can introduce experiments for that. And we probably learned a lot. We gained a lot of product knowledge and domain knowledge, which we can document both for ourselves in the future, other people joining, and the rest of the company. And if any production issues do occur, you can help turn those into automated regression tests. And you can help the team get better at how we respond to incidents. There's an enormous number of things that we can contribute. And this is also the practical application of a lot of fancy phrases you hear, like shifting left, shifting right, and a whole team responsibility for quality. This is what that specifically looks like. And to hammer that point home, so this is kind of the past, present, future. It used to be that we mostly tested at the end of implementation, also after code reviews had passed, and then we moved to also being involved more before development started at the requirement stage. And now the idea is we want to be everywhere, at every stage of the development lifecycle, and also have appropriate static checks, dynamic tests at every stage of the pipeline. Okay, how can you actually get there? I would say start with your own company. It might be tempting to think, oh, well, in our company we don't do this, so I'll have to look for that elsewhere. But I think it's much easier to mold your existing position to something more resembling what you think it should look like, then find it prepared for you somewhere else. And then also, I think you should be focusing on getting support bottom up from the team rather than top down. I've tried the top down approach before, but then you fall into a rabbit hole of ROI estimations and new outside pressures on the team. It was not a good idea. It's much better just to convince your team and move from there. And it may be helpful to share a vision to the team about why you're trying to move towards this different role, what that will look like, what benefit that will bring. But ultimately, you want to take it one step at a time. If you try to do all this at once, you will encounter friction and chaos. And if maybe you do like friction and chaos, then have some excellent bands to recommend. But when you're introducing change to teams, I would say do it slowly. Check in with people who are immediately on board, especially check in with people who are not on board, and see why. And measure the impact of what you're changing. Decide ahead of time on how you will know that this is having positive impact, and then try it for a month maybe and measure it. This was my own high-level vision, but this is quite big picture. This doesn't span a team, this spans the whole company. But you could take a subset of this to sort of picture for yourself, okay, this is our pipeline, and these are the kinds of static checks we think should be present, kind of automated checks, dynamic checks we think should be present, kind of observability we want to be in there. And there are some items that also go into quality that are also important, that aren't connected to the pipeline, but are also important. You might want to include that in your vision as well. All right, on the flip side, there are some disadvantages to this, or I should say challenges. Frame it positively. People can feel spread thin because there's so much to wrap your tentacles around at all times. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you do, as I proposed, take it one change at a time, that will become a habit for the team. And then you can move on to the next thing. It won't feel like you're trying to change and do many things at the same time. Plus, the whole idea of building this team-wide quality culture is that fewer and fewer things depend solely on you. And yeah, until that time, the way to not get overwhelmed is to take it one step at a time. And to compensate for not having a clear single core activity that clearly shows your value perhaps, or that makes you feel like, yes, I'm contributing, like number of tests that you're writing, the number of issues that you're logging, you'll need to find that value somewhere else in the team feedback that you get, as well as, for example, the DORA metrics. Let me just go into that separately to show what I mean by DORA metrics. So these are metrics that correlate with high-performing teams. So how often are you able to release to production? How long does it take to get something into production? And that doesn't just cover the pipeline duration, but also how long it takes to do any asynchronous code reviews. And then of those releases, how often do they lead to incidents in production or significantly reduced experience for the user? And if those issues occur, also how quickly are you able to recover from them? So if you're assisting a team well, these numbers should be improving. Of course, there will be other influences on those numbers as well. So that's why it's important to also get team feedback rather than just looking at these targets, although they are helpful. And as resistant to change, you might be in a team where most of the team thinks this whole dynamic of developers develop, testers do the testing, and then repeat. They might think that that's the most efficient way of working. And maybe it's even true for their context. I don't think it's likely to be, even in heavily compliance-driven context, but you can examine that first. And then experiment. So if you think things would work better in a different way, say what benefits you'd realistically expect when you try this, then try it, and then measure whether it indeed had that impact. And then in the implementation phase, I showed a lot of different collaboration methods, and that can be pretty fatiguing, working together that intensely with people a lot of the time. And yeah, if you are interested in that topic, on Martin Fowler's website, there's a bit on pair programming that goes into a lot of the challenges in this and how to mitigate them. I will just keep it short and say be flexible. So if someone does get tired of talking to the same person for hours on end, take a break, work on your own for a bit. That's not an issue. Career path. Okay, so when you look at LinkedIn and you see all these jobs that ask for experience in Cypress and Playwright, you might think, okay, it's better for my career if I actually focus on that. And that's fair enough. If you think this would help you make a living, then be pragmatic. But I will counter with this. If there are two people applying for the same job, and one of them writes this excellently well-structured, meaningful UI test, and another writes average, mediocre tests maybe, but they can talk very knowledgeably about contract testing, about shifting right, and they can show practical examples of how they've helped developers be better testers, how they've done pair testing, then to me that second person holds greater promise to the company. And finally, I return to where I started. Is it still fun? The answer is yes, but in a different way. So gone are the days where you could enjoy just putting on your headphones and spending a few days just tinkering with test code or playing the detective game, or writing feature files, whatever it may be. But it's in the same way that developers can no longer really craft something until it hits their idea of perfection and only then show it to someone. We all need to be more collaborative these days, and we still need those skills, the coding skills, the exploration skills. We still need those, and we can organize bug bashes for the whole team to play that detective game together. It's just a multiplayer game now. So give it a go. If you're a test engineer, you've probably heard a few things you're already doing or that you're doing less of. So maybe take some of the things that you're doing less of and try those in your team. And if you're a developer, maybe invite the test engineer on your team to look at your screen sometime, to look at what you've done, also your test code. And if you're an engineering manager, show your team this talk maybe and see what they think could work for them and what couldn't and why they think that. And let me know what your experiences are, because I would love to learn. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wilco. So we have some time to answer a few questions. So I'll start in the audience. If anyone has any questions for Wilco. Anyone? Let me just check online if anyone has any questions. Yeah, I do have a few questions, if you don't mind me asking. Would you prefer if I sat there and asked a question, though? Or you don't mind if I sit here?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So you talked a lot about the coach role.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot. So do you see that as like a role for a test engineer, though?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's behind the question. Maybe it comes from the idea that some of these activities sound like something that maybe a product owner could do, or that an engineering manager could do. But I see this as perfectly suited for a test engineer. I suppose especially because they combine three different perspectives: the technical perspective, the business perspective, and the user perspective. And I think that allows them to kind of see the bigger picture better. in terms of specifically the test activities, but also the things I mentioned that are more about quality more broadly.
Okay.
Hope that answers that question.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they can ask a follow-up.
I do have one question. So another question. Sorry, you mentioned like the days of the QA being at the end of the pipeline are kind of gone, and now they're involved in the whole process. So primarily talking about the automation of testing, so including it in the development pipeline, automating the tests when people are deploying and stuff like that. I assume that's correct?
That's part of it, but that's not all of it. I showed what you can do before, when we're still at the idea stage. There's already so much we can contribute at that point that doesn't involve test automation.
But do you see test automation maybe like slowing down the development process in any way? Because it is more delving more into the dev teams as well and spreading the knowledge, which is pretty good. But do you see it like slowing down the current development process of engineers in companies?
Oh, do you mean if a test engineer is pairing with a developer, that would slow them down? It might be slowing them down, but that cost, I think, doesn't weigh up to the knowledge sharing and the quality of those of the tests. Those tests should become more meaningful as a result. If that's not the case, that's something to measure and improve upon. But I think the cost of having those pairing sessions, and as a result, it might take longer with 2 people. I think that's worth it. Okay,
that's good to know. Well, thank you for taking the time to present to us here in the office and people remote. So now we'll move on to our next talker, who will be joining us remotely. So this is Floor, a staff developer at Aiven.io, and she will be talking to us about Grafana, about alerting, monitoring, and all the fun, wild, and kooky things that Grafana have to offer. So yes, I'll just hand it over to you, Floor. Can you hear us?
You can see my screen.
We're having some technical issues on your sound. Wait, no, yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you can see my screen too, because that's kind of important too.
Yes, we can.
Cool. Awesome. So, hi everyone. Yes, indeed, I'll be talking a lot about Grafana today. Grafana is a tool that is made and maintained by Grafana Labs. And since its early beginnings in 2014, Grafana has become one of the most popular open source projects on GitHub. And it's mostly because Grafana can give teams, and especially distributed teams, sort of that single source of truth when it comes to the health of their projects. Grafana, in my opinion, is an excellent tool for alerting as well, and I will come back to that later, as well as any of the other things that you can do with Grafana. So who am I? My name is indeed Floor Dres. Thank you for the introduction. I'm a staff developer advocate at Aiven, which is an open source database as a service company. Previously, I worked in developer relations for Microsoft and also at Grafana Labs. I co-organize the DevopsDays Amsterdam and Devopsdays Eindhoven conferences, and I'm a member of the advisory board Devopsdays Core. I host a meetup that's called Contributing.today that's a monthly virtual first and only meetup on open source topics. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP awarded for my community work in the developer technology space. And then, like aside from work, in my spare time, I tend to my chickens, bunny, dog, son, not necessarily in that order. I knit and I enjoy refurbishing old stuff. But yeah, back to Grafana because we're not here to talk about me. All right. So Grafana, in essence, allows you to query, visualize, and alert on and understand your data, no matter where that is stored. Actually, by combining and correlating data in one dashboard, your team is literally always on the same page, which is incredibly important when we talk about DevOps. And when I say every source, I really mean virtually any source, because Grafana's plugin catalog is massive and it's growing. Today, Grafana supports over 290 plugins. And Grafana really starts making sense when you start connecting to more of those sources, because then you start connecting the dots between your, I don't know what you have, like maybe your Splunk, Oracle, and MongoDB. And when you're missing a data source, there's even one data source to sort of like rule them all. It's a general purpose Infinity plugin, and it visualizes data from virtually any like JSON, CSV, XML, GraphQL, or HTML endpoint. And then also you can create your own plugin for Grafana and submit it for review. They have lengthy tutorials about how to do that. And what I really appreciate about Grafana plugins is that they ship with almost no telemetry. So they're not bulky at all. I can imagine that maybe for an author, it's then harder to improve on your plugin and make sure that it works for the people that use it. And that's maybe why there are some of the fringe plugins where people wanted to have that Prometheus plugin, but also with XYZ. Anyway, I once collaborated on a plugin for Orbit, which is a tool that helps you measure community impact. I can do it, so you can probably also create a plugin yourself. Aiven, where I work, has a managed offering of Grafana, and we offer support for 62 plugins, which is way more than some of the big cloud vendors, but that's a little humble brag. And I monitor Jira like a hawk to see which plugins we now support, so that I can try those out and let the world know that we have even more support. I want to talk about Grafana use cases for a little bit. As we, I think, all know, is that DevOps aims to shorten the development lifecycle and provide continuous delivery with high-quality software. And we talk about shifting left a lot. Wilco talked about it as well. We just don't want to wait until our product or service is in the hands of the customers before we do things like testing and quality assurance and security and maybe documentation. And Grafana is definitely part of that CI/CD story, but so are a million of other tools, right? I mean, look at this page. I don't even know if this DevOps landscape graph for 2022 is for real or if it's a parody. These are so many tools, so many players. And that point is also, there's also many tools to manage all of that shifting, right? And different teams and different self-regulating teams often use different tools, and access might not be shared among those teams equally. And so that's where teams can use Grafana for ad hoc troubleshooting, because when you allow Grafana to query, access your monitoring tools, all your applications, you're all looking at the same spikes, and you can come up with a plan of action quicker. Like the times I've heard, like, oh, do you see these spikes that I'm seeing? No, because we're on PagerDuty and you're on, I don't know, Datadog. Like, that's the beauty of Grafana. I can sort of all bring that together in one single pane of glass. Wilco mentioned Minority Report, kind of that style, right? And we're really on that same page, and we can talk about what we're seeing. Another use case for Grafana is observability. So Grafana visualizes time series data as graphs, and this allows you to observe how your application behaves over time. And what's more is that Grafana offers insights to all kinds of stakeholders, regardless of their technical skills. I mean, depending on how you design your dashboard, but mostly, like, it's very accessible for a large number of people, regardless of their skills. And that's just because you can customize that entire layer of visualization. I think we have all come across offices that sport these beautiful Grafana dashboards on their engineering floor, and sometimes also in like the war rooms that you see that companies have during incidents. Another use case for Grafana is alerting. I wonder if you you'll get the joke, hopefully. Anyway, in the alerting menu for Grafana, you can use the mixed view to combine alerting data from all of those different data sources as well, or specifically. And you can make it so that you only notify your on-call team when alarm bells go off at PagerDuty and Datadog and New Relic and any other source, so that you're not waking people up over false positives, because that leads to alerting fatigue, and that's not what we want. So it's a good thing then that Grafana allows you to set rules and conditions, so you can further improve the signal to noise ratio as well. I don't know if you've heard recently, like the term quiet quitting is making its way over the internet. And quiet quitting is where you're not really quitting your job, but you're doing like the bare minimum that is in your responsibilities and nothing more. And I feel like that comes from years of being overworked. And I feel like being on call for stressful episodes at your company causes a lot of that quiet quitting. And also nobody wants to be interrupted, especially when nothing is actually on fire. So I love Grafana for that use case where you can really sort of pinpoint, only wake me up when stuff's really on fire. Otherwise, let me sleep. I mentioned dashboards, and there are a lot of shared dashboards. Community members make a ton of different dashboards and then share them with the rest of the community. So you'll find a dashboard for pretty much every single use case you can think of. And I mean, if you don't find a dashboard for that use case, you can also upload it and share it with the rest of the community. I love this, that like there's people that are just better at creating beautiful dashboards and making data very insightful and cool. So why not benefit from some of the people that like actually have an eye for this? Every new release comes with some supported visualizations as well, so it's interesting to keep sort of up with what's happening in that space. Again, Grafana was built on the principle that data should be accessible for everyone and not only the lone ops person in the server room somewhere in the back. And by democratizing this access to data, Grafana helps to create this culture where data can be easily accessible and used by the people that need it at that time, and break down silos as a result, and empowering teams. Aiven for Grafana, a lot of other vendors that offer managed Grafana also offer pre-built dashboards for a few of our services, like default templates for instance, how we think that you are going to monitor your OpenSearch instance. So that's really interesting to have a look at as well. And while we're on the topic of managed Grafana, I mean, I'm on work time, so I need to tell you a little bit about Aiven. We offer Grafana as a managed service. And I think managed Grafana, or actually any managed service, is pretty cool because you don't have to be the person that needs to do all of the upgrades. And if you're using a tool and it's useful for you, you want to upgrade, right? Because you want to get all the new features, but you also want to benefit from bug fixes and vulnerability fixes. So that is a pretty interesting sort of benefit of using a managed service. But also because database as a service companies like Aiven have other products in their portfolio that usually then integrate really well with whatever managed service got you in that company for the first place, right? In the first place. So you don't have to sort of like piece all of these things together with API calls and whatnot. Like that's been done for you. So sometimes you'll find a vendor that offers support for a couple of those different products that you're using anyway. And that's just a really nice way to sort of like patch it together. Open source Grafana is an option, of course, but you'll need to install it yourself, deploy it yourself, upgrade it yourself, and doesn't offer support or any fancy SLAs or anything. Of course, there is Grafana Cloud as well. That's Grafana Labs' observability platform that comes, of course, with a lot of support, integrated support for logs with Loki and traces with Tempo, Prometheus as well. Anyway, if you want to play around with Aiven for Grafana, then do as I do. You can go to console.aiven.io and create a Grafana service on a trial account. There's a password that's generated for you that you can copy, and you follow the service URI to leave the console and go to Grafana. We support Grafana 8.4.10 currently, I think. Grafana open source is at 9.1.1 today, or 2 days ago was released. And when you create your service, you can go to the different integrations and, for instance, make sure that you create a dashboard to monitor your open search. I'm just picking one service. Like we're logging and we're having a look at our open search instance. I don't know if you've ever heard of OpenSearch. It's like the Elasticsearch alternative that is kind of spearheaded by AWS after Elastic changed its license. Maybe that's another thing to mention. Grafana is a big open source. It is like a big name in the open source ecosystem. They contribute to a bunch of projects. All of their stuff is open source and licensed as open source, and so is Aiven. So when Elasticsearch made a license change that made it not open source anymore or not comply with the open source definition, we switched to supporting OpenSearch instead. Yeah, and like once you wait a little minute, it will start observing your open source cluster, and you'll start seeing all these types of pretty graphs. Again, like OpenSearch lets you customize the whole thing. So if you rather look at different types of graphs or other stuff is important, you can just sort of drag and drop however you want it to look like, or add some of the panel the panel plugins to create the view that you want to. I wanted to talk a little bit about alerting. Alerting has gotten better with Grafana 9, which means that's not something that we currently support with Aiven, but we're going to really soon. And if you ever want to play around with alerting, and again, like it allows you to get all of that stuff from different data sources and set rules for only waking people up when stuff's really on fire. And you do that by clicking alerting from the sidebar. That will show you the existing alerts if you have any. I played around with, and I invite you to do the same. If you go to play.grafana.org, there's different demos and different sort of like demo setups that you can play around with. So you can have a look at the existing alerts, or you can create a new alert if that's your jam and you just want to connect stuff to it. Connect any data source. So for instance, maybe you want to connect Prometheus alert to go off if you're using too many CPU resources. You'll want your testing intervals to be short so that you'll get some quick first results, and then you can tweak from there. Then there's the notification policies tab. So there you can configure who the alerts are going to be sent to. And in the context tab, you can, add all of those email addresses that you want to add to a list. Then if a rule is ever too noisy or you don't want to receive notifications for a period of time, in the silences tab, you can create a break from getting some of those CPU resources, alerts, things. And you can also use mute timer under the notifications policies to stop alerts from coming in for like a small period of time. So for instance, it's King's Days in the Netherlands, right? And you want to only resume alerts after you've eaten your tompoes, if you know what a tompoes is. So here's some of that played at Grafana. where you can actually see the dashboards and you see where it's firing, where you need to pay attention to. There's also Grafana On Call that is open source since this year, which collects and analyzes alerts from multiple monitoring systems, just like Grafana Alerting, but then also helps you with your on-call rotations based on the schedules that you feed it. It can provision automatic escalations, and you can configure how you want to receive your alerts, so that be that phone calls or an SMS or a Slack or even Telegram notifications if you want, not the paper Telegram, but the and that's just, yeah, Grafana On Call is an interesting announcement, and it's only one of the few things that were announced at GrafanaCon this year. Grafana keeps adding amazing features and blowing me away, and it also adds a couple of interesting companies to its sort of big tent philosophy. So I would really love for you to consider Grafana as a way to share your data with your colleagues and your stakeholders from whatever path of life they're coming. Maybe you can start with a little smart home monitoring. You can find plenty of examples for setting up alerts, for instance, whenever your plants need watering. And I bet that the next time that someone tells you that, do you see this spike? Or, like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? You can be like, well, we could be seeing the same thing if we're using Grafana. Yeah, I'd love for you to try it out once. Yeah, and with that, I would love to thank you. I'd love to hear what you think of Grafana as part of the DevOps stack, of part of shifting left. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. It was an amazing talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we do have some time for some questions. So are there any questions from our audience? Yeah? No? No? Okay, well, I also have some questions for you, if you don't mind. So,
Sure.
In your opinion, which are the most useful Grafana plugins? And in your personal opinion, which is your favorite?
Yeah, it's gonna be really hard to not be biased there. So I actually came to work at Grafana Labs when I was working at a really small company called K6. They do load testing, performance testing, and they have, as they were acquired by Grafana, of course, they improved on their plugin for load testing. I thought that was a really useful. Well, anyway, I think the companies, they just fit together really well. But I thought that was a really interesting use case, because even though K6 did have some dashboard to show your load testing results, again, in Grafana, you could compare it with other data sources and figure out what was happening, what was firing of what. And you can go so much deeper in the data. So I thought that was I always think that that's a really interesting one. Observing, I mentioned I created a plugin, or co-created a plugin for Orbit, which was community tracking, especially tech community tracking. So if you're tracking your technical community, you want to know what are they saying about stuff on Twitter and what are they working on GitHub. Unfortunately, Orbit doesn't make it through a lot of the compliance departments at different companies. So if you're doing community management or developer advocacy for a company that has stringent compliance rules, which in itself really good, but you still want to get a feel for what's happening across your GitHub repositories, I think the GitHub data source plugin is really, really interesting as well.
Awesome.
But I mean, everyone's mileage might vary, right? Like, everybody's using different tools, and so whatever tools you're already using, you're already familiar with, and combining those together, that's where the magic happens.
Oh, sounds fantastic. Well, I guess that's the end of our meetup. Well, thank you everyone for attending in person and for people watching on YouTube. If you'd like to attend another Sendcloud meetup, you can follow us on Meetup or LinkedIn. You can view the recording on YouTube if you subscribe to Sendcloud Engineering. And yeah, hopefully we can see you guys soon. And now for the second best part of meetups, pizza and beer downstairs. Okay, well, thank you guys and have a great evening. Bye-bye.